Daniel adjusted the collar of his navy blue shirt and glanced at his reflection in the restaurant window before stepping inside. He felt slightly foolish for being nervous, but he couldn't help it. Blind dates had never been his idea of a good evening. He preferred meeting people naturally, through friends or shared interests, rather than sitting across from a complete stranger with the pressure of making a perfect first impression. Still, his younger sister had been unusually persistent. "You've been single for too long," she had told him with a teasing smile. "Her name is Emily. She's funny, thoughtful, and I honestly think you'll get along. Just give it one chance." After weeks of saying no, Daniel had finally agreed. The restaurant his sister had chosen was warm and inviting. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers while candles flickered on every table. The smell of fresh bread, garlic, and herbs filled the air, making the place feel comfortable rather than overly formal. Couples chatted quietly, families celebrated birthdays, and waiters moved gracefully between the tables carrying steaming plates of pasta and pizza. The hostess welcomed Daniel with a friendly smile and led him to a small table beside the window. "Your guests should be joining you soon," she said. "I hope so," Daniel replied with an awkward grin. He sat down and checked his phone. It was exactly 7 o'clock. Everything was on time. Trying to calm his nerves, he looked over the menu even though he wasn't really reading it. Every few seconds his eyes drifted toward the entrance. Whenever the door opened, he instinctively looked up, expecting to see a woman searching the room for him. Instead, strangers walked in one after another. At 7:10, he ordered a glass of water. At 7:15, he wondered if traffic was causing the delay. By 7:20, he sent a polite message. "Hi, Emily. I'm here at the restaurant. Hope everything's okay." The message showed as delivered, but there was no reply. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket, trying not to let disappointment show on his face. He reminded himself that unexpected things happened. Maybe she couldn't find parking. Maybe her phone battery had died. A cheerful voice interrupted his thoughts. "Can I get you anything else?" He looked up and saw the waitress standing beside the table. Her name tag read Lily. She appeared to be around his age, with kind brown eyes and a warm smile that seemed completely genuine. "Not yet," Daniel answered. "I'm still waiting for someone." She glanced at the empty chair across from him. "First date?" He chuckled softly. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you keep looking at the door every 30 seconds. Daniel laughed for the first time that evening. "I guess I'm not hiding it very well." "No worries," Lily replied. "Good luck." She walked away, leaving Daniel smiling despite himself. Another 15 minutes passed. The restaurant became busier. More conversations filled the room, and every table around him was occupied. He noticed a young couple celebrating an anniversary, an elderly husband gently pouring water for his wife, and a family trying to convince a little boy to eat his vegetables. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Daniel felt strangely alone. He checked his phone again. Still nothing. His sister texted him instead. "How's it going? Is she nice?" Daniel stared at the screen for a moment before typing. "She hasn't arrived yet." Almost immediately his sister replied. "That's strange. She confirmed this afternoon." Daniel didn't answer. He didn't want his sister worrying or feeling responsible. A few minutes later Lily returned carrying a basket of warm bread. "This is from the kitchen," she said. "I didn't order it." "I know." He looked confused. "They made extra, and I figured you shouldn't have to wait on an empty stomach." "That's really kind of you," she smiled. "I've seen enough awkward first dates to know waiting feels longer when you're hungry." Daniel laughed again. "You must have some interesting stories. You have no idea." For a few moments, they chatted casually about the restaurant, favorite foods, and how unpredictable customer service could be. The conversation was easy, without the uncomfortable pauses Daniel had been expecting from his blind date. Then Lily noticed another customer waving for assistance. "I'd better get back to work." "Of course. It was nice talking to you." "You too." As she walked away, Daniel realized those few minutes had been the most enjoyable part of his evening. By 7:45, his hope had begun to fade. He refreshed his messages again. Nothing. No explanation. No apology. No phone call. The excitement he had felt before leaving home had quietly turned into embarrassment. He wondered if the people around him had noticed he had been sitting alone the entire time. Perhaps they assumed exactly what had happened. He took a deep breath and reached for his wallet. "I think I've waited long enough," he whispered to himself. Just then Lily returned with a sympathetic expression. "I'm really sorry," she said gently. "It looks like she isn't coming." Daniel forced a small smile. "I guess I got stood up." "You don't deserve that." "Maybe she had a reason." "Maybe," Lily replied carefully. "But she could have at least let you know." Daniel nodded. "I suppose you're right." She placed the bill on the table, but didn't immediately leave. Instead, she looked around the restaurant as though making sure no one was paying attention. There was something unusual about her expression now. It wasn't just sympathy. It was hesitation, as if she were deciding whether to reveal something she had been keeping to herself. After a long moment, she quietly pulled out the empty chair across from him and sat down. Daniel blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry if this seems unprofessional," she said softly. "But before you leave, can I tell you something important?" Daniel looked at her, suddenly sensing that whatever she was about to say might explain everything. Daniel leaned forward, his confusion replacing the disappointment that had weighed on him all evening. Lily's expression was serious, and for a brief moment, the sounds of the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. Lily took a slow breath before answering. "I wasn't trying to eavesdrop," she said. "I was greeting customers near the entrance when a woman walked in about half an hour ago. She asked if someone named Daniel was waiting for a blind date." Daniel's heart skipped. That had to be Emily. "I believe it was." "Then why didn't she come over?" Lily looked down at the table for a second before meeting his eyes again. "Because she wasn't alone." Daniel frowned. "There was another man with her," Lily continued. "He stayed close to the door while she looked around the restaurant. As soon as she saw you sitting here, she smiled, but not in the way someone smiles when they're excited to meet someone." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What happened?" "They started talking quietly." "I only caught parts of the conversation because I happened to be standing nearby, waiting to seat another customer." Daniel listened without interrupting. The man asked her, "So that's him?" And she said. Lily hesitated. She nodded and laughed. Then she said, "Yep, he actually came." Daniel stared at the untouched glass of water in front of him. "I don't understand." The man laughed too. Lily said softly. "He asked if she was still planning to meet you." "And?" She shook her head. Daniel swallowed hard. "No," she told him. "I just wanted to see whether he'd really show up." The words hung heavily between them. For several seconds Daniel couldn't think of anything to say. He had prepared himself for the possibility that Emily had forgotten, gotten lost, or changed her mind. He had never imagined that the entire evening might have been nothing more than a joke. "Did they leave together?" Lily nodded. "They walked out less than a minute later." Daniel let out a slow breath and leaned back in his chair. "I guess that answers my questions. I'm really sorry." He gave a small, tired smile. "You know what's strange?" I'm not even angry. No, I'm disappointed. Mostly because someone would go through the trouble of making another person feel foolish just for entertainment. Lily understood exactly what he meant. I almost didn't tell you. Why? I wasn't sure if it was my place. Daniel looked at her gratefully. I'm glad you did. She smiled faintly. I figured the truth would hurt less than wondering whether you had done something wrong. Daniel thought about that for a moment. Thank you. They sat in comfortable silence before Daniel finally chuckled. You know, my sister spent 2 weeks convincing me to come tonight. She must feel terrible. I'll tell her it wasn't her fault. Lily nodded. I hope you do. Daniel reached for the bill. I guess I should head home. As he stood, Lily spoke again. Can I ask you something? Sure. Has something like this happened to you before? He laughed softly. No. Thankfully. Good. Why good? Because I'd hate to think kindness is becoming rare. Daniel smiled. I was actually beginning to think tonight had completely destroyed my faith in people. And now? He looked at her for a moment. Now I'm not so sure. She raised an eyebrow. What changed? You? Lily looked genuinely surprised. Me? You didn't know me. You didn't have to bring me bread, check on me, or tell me what happened. You could have ignored the whole thing like everyone else. She shrugged modestly. It just didn't feel right to let you leave thinking you had been forgotten. Daniel laughed quietly. I came here expecting to meet someone completely different. And instead, I met the one person who treated me like a human being. A faint blush crossed Lily's face. Before either of them could say anything else, the restaurant manager called her name from across the room. She stood quickly. Duty calls. Daniel smiled. I suppose it does. As she started walking away, he spoke again. Lily? She turned around. Thank you. Really? She smiled warmly. You're welcome, Daniel. He walked toward the entrance, but before pushing open the door, he glanced back. Lily was helping another table, laughing with a family as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet, for some reason, she looked over at the exact same moment. Their eyes met across the busy restaurant. Neither of them waved. Neither of them spoke. But they both smiled. Daniel stepped out into the cool evening air feeling strangely lighter than when he had arrived. The date he had been looking forward to had never happened, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that the night hadn't been a complete loss. Sometimes life closed one door so quietly that you barely noticed another one opening. Over the next several months, Daniel found himself returning to the restaurant more often than he needed to. At first, he told himself it was because the food was excellent. Then he claimed it was convenient after work. Deep down, however, he knew the real reason. He hoped to see Lily. Whenever she was working, they would spend a few minutes talking whenever the restaurant became quiet. Their conversation started with simple topics. Favorite movies, childhood memories, travel dreams, and funny stories from work, but gradually became more personal. Daniel learned that Lily had always wanted to open a small bakery one day, while Lily discovered that Daniel volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends because he believed every animal deserved a second chance. Neither of them tried to impress the other. There were no games, no pretending to be someone they weren't, and no hidden expectations. Their friendship grew naturally, built on honesty and kindness. A few weeks later, Daniel finally asked Lily out for coffee. This time she smiled without hesitation. I'd love to. That coffee date turned into dinner the following weekend. Dinner became long evening walks through the city park. Soon they were spending birthdays, holidays, and quiet Sunday afternoons together. Every moment felt easy, as though they had known each other for years instead of months. One evening, While watching the sunset by the river, Lily laughed softly. You know what's funny? What? If your blind date had actually shown up, we probably never would have met. Daniel smiled. I've thought about that more times than I'd like to admit. Do you ever wonder what would have happened? He shook his head. Not anymore. Why? Because wondering about the life I didn't get would only distract me from the one I'm lucky enough to have. Lily reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. I like that answer. Nearly a year after the night they first met, Daniel made a decision. He wanted to ask Lily to marry him. Instead of choosing an expensive hotel or a crowded public place, he knew exactly where he wanted to propose. The same restaurant, the same table, the same seat where he had once waited alone. He secretly spoke with the restaurant manager, who happily agreed to help. Several members of the staff remembered the night Daniel had been left waiting, and they were thrilled to see how differently his story had turned out. On the evening of their anniversary, Lily believed they were simply celebrating another wonderful year together. As they entered the restaurant, she smiled. It feels strange being back at this table. Daniel laughed. I was hoping you'd remember. How could I forget? They enjoyed dinner while sharing memories of everything that had happened over the past year. They laughed about awkward first dates, road trips that had gone wrong, and the time Daniel accidentally burned dinner trying to surprise her with a homemade meal. When dessert arrived, the lights in the restaurant dimmed slightly. Lily looked around, confused. What's going on? Daniel stood up. He walked around the table and gently took both of her hands. Do you remember what you asked me the first night we met? She smiled. I asked if I could tell you something important. You did. And that conversation changed everything. Daniel took a deep breath. Lily, that night you didn't just tell me the truth. You reminded me that kindness still exists. You could have ignored me like everyone else, but instead you chose compassion. Her eyes began to fill with tears. You made one lonely evening become the beginning of the happiest year of my life. He slowly knelt on one knee. The entire restaurant fell silent. Guests stopped eating. The staff smiled from a distance. Daniel reached into his pocket and opened a small velvet ring box. Lily, every day with you has been better than the last. You've become my best friend, my greatest source of strength, and the person I want beside me for the rest of my life. His voice trembled with emotion. Will you marry me? Lily covered her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. For several seconds she couldn't speak. Finally, she nodded again and again. Yes, she whispered. Then, louder this time, with a joyful laugh through her tears, she said, Yes, of course I will. The restaurant erupted into applause. Some customers even stood to clap, while a few wiped away happy tears. The manager smiled proudly, and several waiters who remembered Daniel's lonely evening congratulated the couple. As Daniel slipped the ring onto Lily's finger, she hugged him tightly. I can't believe this, she whispered. I can, Daniel replied. I've believed it since the day you sat down across from me. Months later, as they unpacked boxes after moving into their first home together, Daniel came across an old email account he hadn't opened in over a year. There was one unread message. The sender's name was Emily. Curious, he opened it. She apologized for what had happened that night. She admitted the blind date had been a cruel prank encouraged by someone she had been dating at the time. She wrote that she had often thought about Daniel and deeply regretted hurting someone who had done nothing wrong. She ended the email by wishing him happiness wherever life had taken him. Daniel read the message quietly. Then he smiled. Not because the apology erased the past, but because he no longer carried any anger. If that painful evening had never happened, he might never have met Lily. He deleted the email, closed his laptop, and walked into the living room, where Lily was arranging flowers on the dining table. She looked up and smiled the same warm smile that had first welcomed him in the restaurant. Daniel wrapped his arms around her. "What was that for?" she asked. "For reminding me that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as disappointments." Lily smiled and rested her head against his shoulder. In that moment, Daniel realized life had given him something far better than the date he had once waited for. It had led him to the person who chose honesty over silence, kindness over indifference, and love over chance. Sometimes, the best stories begin with an empty chair and end with two hearts finding exactly where they belong.